Mrs. TERESA Tapia, thank you very much for coming on to theboxingbar.com and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Teresa, before we talk about the film, Tapia, let's go ahead and get to know you a little bit. Were you born there in New Mexico and were you raised there?
Actually, I was born in New Mexico, but I was raised in California.
And how was it that you were there, came to California, and then went back to New Mexico?
My mom and dad divorced when I was 11, and I moved with my dad to California. And I came back to New Mexico after my dad passed away when I was 18. And that's how I met Johnny.
And did you have an ideal or normal childhood growing up there with your parents at home when you were a kid?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, we were the epitome of normal. Normal, middle-class family as you can get.
And as a teenager, how were you personality-wise? I mean, now I can know that I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to talk to an intelligent, nice, very polite, friendly person. But what were you like as a teenager growing up?
As a teenager, I think I was a little bit different as far as, women go, I guess. My dad, I was raised with a male figure, and so his presence was always there where, most females, they're raised with their mom, and they always want that dream of the happily ever after and all that stuff. Mine was a little bit different. My dad taught me to be independent and to be just do for yourself and not depend on anyone. Make it happen because you can, not because somebody handed it to you.
And I guess $1 million question, when was the first time you locked eyes with this great man, Johnny Tapia? When was the first time you met him?
First time I met Johnny, it was in 1993. I had went with a cousin of mine to go pick up her boyfriend, and it was kind of like a get-together they were having. And I remember walking in this house, and it was here in Albuquerque, and I remember, walking in this house, and I see this guy sitting on the counter, and he was like bigger than life, even though he was not a big physical presence. He dominated some kind of where people were just drawn to him. And at that point, I wasn't really familiar with him. I didn't live in New Mexico. I just moved back. I didn't know anything about him. But anyhow, he was sitting on the counter, and I remember standing there, and I'm not really a party person, and I'm not real one into a bunch of social things. I like more one-on-one type of things. And so I kind of was just sitting by the door waiting for my cousin to come out, and he walked up to me. And that's kind of where it all started. From the day I met him, we were married approximately 4 weeks later.
And when you guys started dating and getting into a relationship there, did you feel it was going to be this fairy tale type thing, or did you know it was going to be a roller coaster ride down the line?
I think I was so young and naive at that time. I really didn't know what I was getting into because people knew Johnny. They knew his history of drugs and that he'd had problems and had been kicked out of boxing. See, and I didn't know all of that. So I was kind of I just didn't know. There were so many things that, to me, I thought, he was a nice guy. He was very just persuasive in, the whole chasing thing. What Johnny liked, he said, where he knew that I was the one was because when he first asked me out, I rejected him. And he wasn't used to rejection. He could, he had his pick of whatever he wanted. And I was like, nope, I don't care who you are. And I remember he would try to impress me by using his past boxing, and none of it mattered. I was like, and so what do you know? It doesn't matter. So that attitude, because I was so indifferent towards him, the chase was on. And I remember our second meeting, he told me, you're the girl I'm going to marry. And I kind of laughed. I said, okay, you can't even get a date with me and I'm going to marry you. But, 4 weeks later we were married. And so, like I said, it was a roller coaster ride, but I wasn't aware what I was in for until we were actually married.
What was he like as a person? Was he friendly? Was he polite? Was he loud? Was he, obnoxious? What was he like?
He was not obnoxious. He was very humble, down to earth, but he was very loud. He was always the life of the party. If he walked in a room, everybody was his friend by the time he left. That's kind of how he lived his life. He loved everybody and everything, and there was not a stranger to Johnny. He didn't know you, and it wasn't about him using his status as a boxer, none of that. It was just he loved people. He was genuinely a nice guy who loved people.
And how did your family or close friends feel about him, if they knew about his past or whatever? How did they feel about him and your guys' relationship?
My mom and my grandmother loved him. They took him in like he was their surrogate son. They loved him. He could do no wrong in their eyes. It didn't matter that he had a past. Their heart went out to them. Their maternal instincts kicked in, and he was spoiled rotten with them. My brothers, It's funny because my brother Robert, he passed away, but him and Johnny became so close. I mean, you would not see one without the other for years and years until my brother passed away. And at first, he was the one that was against it because he did know of Johnny's reputation. But most of the family, accepted him. And my brother Robert was against it for the first, I'd say it happened so fast, he had no choice but to get used to it. But after that, they were inseparable.
And what was it like the day that you actually got married to what was that like as far as the day's events?
It was actually an unforgettable time, not for the usual reasons. I mean, the day we got married, I remember he wanted to get married at Wells Park Community Center because that's where he grew up in that area. And I remember as we, stood there and, we exchanged our vows, I remember as soon as I said, I do, I remember he looked over at me and he said, okay, now I know you can't ever leave me. And he called off the reception. We had people there, guests, food, and he said, there's a party, and he sent my mom's address, and he had people over there. And I just remember that day, I was like, whoa, everything happened so fast. And I remember being at this, at my mom's house, and one of his friends came up to me and said, if you want to see what you married, go back and look in the bathroom. And I remember walking back there, and that was the first time I had witnessed him using drugs, and I was so shocked. And he just had this nonchalant attitude, like, oh, well, this is me, this is who I am. And I remember it escalated because he was fighting that day, and the police came, and my mom, she actually saved him because they were going to arrest him, and she said, they just got married, and I remember the cops told him, go ahead and leave and go now or you're going to get arrested. So we left, and we had this beautiful suite reserved for us, and he didn't want to go there because it was too far from the party, so he took me to this really awful rundown motel, I remember, and we walked in, I mean, there was like no consummation, nothing like that. It was more like we set our bags down, and he walked out and said, I need to make a phone call. I didn't see him again until the next day, and it was kind of crazy because I had called my mom and told her, I'm staying at this place, change of plans, and she said, okay, thanks for letting me know. Well, the next morning, my mom was banging on the door, and I remember opening it, and she was in tears, and I was looking at her, and I said, what happened? And she told me, Johnny's dead, and I was like, what? I hadn't even been married 24 hours, and I was being told I was a widow. So I had to rush down to the hospital, and they had found Johnny on the passenger seat of my car, and he had been overdosed, and he was non-responsive, and they had declared him, dead. But obviously they had revived him by the time I got to the hospital. It was just crazy. That was my life. I remember walking into the hospital, and I was so scared. I thought, here I am identifying my husband's body, and I'm not even married 24 hours. Next thing I know, I hear a bunch of commotion, and I see a guy running down the hallway, and of course it was Johnny in a hospital gown, and he didn't have any underwear on, and you could just see the whole back end of him, and he took off, and I'm like, Johnny, where are you going? And he didn't even stop, and I remember I was like, whoa, and police are chasing him, security's chasing him, and I didn't even, they're trying to get statements, but I wasn't with them, so we left, and I'm with my mom, and I'm still in shock, and we're driving, and I see him running down Central Avenue, and we're yelling for him, and he notices it's us, so he jumps through the window, and, we go home, and I'm like, what the heck happened? And then as that, he recuperated for like 2 or 3 days, I believe, and after that, he disappeared on me for 6 weeks. There I am filing missing persons reports. Anyway, that was how my marriage started.
And I'm sure you know the graphic details and anybody else about his past, before you even got married to him. I'm sure he probably told you about his parents and how they were killed. Do you think that's what he was thinking of when he was doing the drugs, and that's what was missing from his life, and that's why he was hurting, and that's why he even did drugs in the first place? Do you think it all stemmed from his parents not being around, or, what do you think about that?
I believe so. I think what happened with him is he was always haunted by the fact that his mom was murdered, and there was always a void because he was an only child. And so up until the age of 8, he was spoiled rotten. His mom loved him to death. He loved his mom. Everything was great, but she was taken from him suddenly. And so he went from living this spoiled, pampered life to being thrown into this household with his grandparents, who were great people, but they had 12 kids of their own, and they were raising 10 other grandkids already. And so here was Johnny, another mouth to feed, another kid, their life was just hard. And so, and then their discipline was different, they had so many kids, but they had their way to rule them was with an iron fist. You had to, they got beatings regularly, and the uncles who were all older than Johnny. Johnny was 8. The uncles were already 18, 20 years old. They would beat him because they didn't like him. He was just another mouth to feed, another person that they didn't want. So it was always going from one place to another, it was just really, really hard on him.
And it all makes sense from what you're saying, because I have heard a lot of interviews with him, and he brings up that, he always needed affection and love, and it sounds like he wasn't getting it, and the person that probably would have given it to him wasn't around, and unfortunately that's kind of what it sounds like.
Yes, definitely.
And what was he like when he was on drugs? I mean, I think you kind of answered that with that story you just told about the day of your marriage, but was he pretty much night and day when he was on or off of drugs?
He was to a certain extent, but Johnny was, I don't want to glorify drugs or anything like that. It's just that when Johnny was on drugs, he wasn't, I don't know, I've never been around any other addicts but him, but with him, he never tried to hurt anyone else. Like, that's the one thing I can honestly say about him. If he did drugs, he was ashamed because he was high. He would actually hide in a room and wouldn't let anybody see him using, including me. I can honestly say, with the exception of our wedding night, I have never witnessed Johnny using drugs, but I knew he was high. I just never witnessed it, him getting high. He was just real private about that because he never wanted anyone to see him in that light. So he didn't really change as far as being a jerk or anything like that. His change came because he was high, he didn't want to be around people. He'd be paranoid. So he was always hiding out, if you want to call it that. That was the change. And when he was straight, Johnny wanted to be around everybody, and he wanted to be everywhere and anywhere, and he loved people. But when he was messed up, he was afraid for anyone to see him like that.
You were the one that helped him out a lot, getting off of drugs, during those times when, he just had to get off of drugs. You helped him with that. Was it hard to get him off of drugs?
No, it was just a process. It depends on the time, too, because Johnny was he was so dedicated to boxing, and if he knew he had a fight, and if I said, look, Johnny, they just scheduled you a fight, his mind was so strong that he would look at me and say, oh, okay, I got to get cleaned up. Yes, you do. So he would recuperate for a whole week, and then he'd get into hardcore training. But at the end, it was harder because there was no more fights. So what was the incentive to get him clean at the end? That was a little bit harder. It's because when you don't have anything to train for in his mind, then it was harder. Then that's where it got complicated and the fights kind of started because there was in his mind no reason to be clean if there was no fighting.
And him being a successful fighter, was it like a good thing because he was successful in making some money, or was that a bad thing because some of that money was going into the bad stuff, like the bad habit?
Actually, with Johnny, because of who he was and he was so well liked, it was a double-edged sword because he never had to pay for anything. They would give him it, so it didn't matter. Believe me, when you're involved with an addict, you try everything. You don't want to be the enabler, so you try. In my case, anyways, I did everything humanly possible. I've locked this guy in houses with wrought iron and thrown away the key. Because we're Christians, I've taken him to pastors and pray over him. I've taken him to hypnotists. You try everything. Every new drug they say is going to cure the addiction, or every new program. I was always trying. So it's just it just becomes you spend your whole life trying to get them clean because you know the person they are and you know what they're capable of. But it just becomes a full-time thing in itself, just trying to beat the addiction.
How did you feel about his boxing career? Were you proud of him for his accomplishments?
Oh, yeah. I feel that Johnny was a throwback from the olden days, and I think that it's funny because he fought with his heart out, and he was so passionate about it, and I was so proud, and there was no stopping him when he was in that ring in his prime, and he was, one of the greatest fighters that we will ever witness in his weight categories. And had he been around now and this time of day of the way technology is, he'd have been an even bigger superstar because now they have all that behind the scenes. This guy was such a nut, he would have rose to even higher status than what he did, which was pretty impressive, 5-time world champion in 3 different weight classes. So, I mean, I could not, there's just no way to describe how proud I am of him and the things he accomplished.
It's an endless list of all the great fighters that he fought, all the great fights that he had. Which ones in your mind stand out? Which were some of the nights you remember the most and were most proud of him for?
I think his first world title was special to him and to me because it was you know, he had just come back from a 4-year layoff. People had doubted him. You know, his own place doubted him. Everybody talked so much about him. But when he won the championship that night, and it was October the 12th of 1994, it was so amazing. There was not a dry eye in the house. I mean, the pit was full to capacity. Looking around, it was just like magic. And it was just, I can't, you know, you just get chills going back to that time. That was, obvious to me, it was the most sentimental. And he always said the same. It was the most sentimental. Now, the biggest grudge match would have been Danny. His best boxing performance would have been his third world title with Conadu. The best redemption one would have been Jorge Eliezer Julio, because that was coming back from losing from Paulie. Another magical moment for him, of course, was Medina, because he fought in the Madison Square Gardens, which, you know, everybody wants to reach that. So they were all very special in their own ways.
Man, you're going to make me watch all those fights on YouTube later on now, you know, for bringing those up. On May 27th, you know, you unfortunately find out that Johnny had passed, and obviously your life stopped for that while, you know, but what were you like in those next few days, you know, afterwards? Did you keep to yourself? Were you in denial? What were you like?
I think it's the strangest feeling. It's like you just don't even understand how the world keeps going. I remember waking up those days when I slept, because I didn't really sleep. You don't sleep, you don't eat, you're just in this weird state of mind, and you're existing, but you're not living. And I remember the hardest thing for me was every day I would see the sun rise, and I would think, how could this be going? How could life just keep going on? And it was just the most unreal experience of my life, because Johnny was bigger than life. And so you go through the motions of existing, because you can't call it living, but I'm still, because he had so many brushes with death, I'm still waiting for him to come back. Even now I have a hard time, because I think, you think about it, you dream about it, and in my dreams it's always the same thing. You know, he's not really dead, but and in my dreams he's telling me I had to go away because, and it's always this conspiracy, you know, in my dreams, because this person, or there was this agency or whatever, you know, but he's always back. So I think the hardest thing in the end to accept was, no matter how many different things that I did to try to save him from himself and the addiction, in the end, you couldn't prevent what happened, and that was his death. So it's just, like I said, it's a weird, it's one of the most brutal things I've ever had to encounter.
And I remember I watched the services the day of the funeral. I watched them online, live. Actually, I was interviewing somebody while the services were being shown online, and I was interviewing actually Carlos Famoso Hernandez. And Carlos had nothing but great things to say about Johnny, and here he was telling some stories of when he remembers hanging out with Johnny and stuff like that. In your opinions, you know, why do you think he had so much respect from his fellow boxers like Carlos?
I think because Johnny he never let himself be anything other than humble. You know, and when he would see Carlos, you know, like he'd go up to him and, hey, campeón, how are you doing? You know, and that's how Johnny was. He just respected fighters. He respected what they did. He respected all fighters. It never mattered if you didn't win a title or if you had 10 world titles. In his eyes, if you got in there and you trained and you fought, you were a champion. And it was a brutal sport. And it's this like little clique of a world that they're the only ones that understand it. So Johnny had an immense respect for all fighters. He just said, you know, and he also would tell me that he believed that all fighters are so passionate about it and they fight from the heart because they're all missing something. And so Johnny felt like it was this little clique that none of us would ever understand.
And do you still feel him around sometimes?
Yes, it's funny here at home. I still have his room set up the same way that he had it. His bed's still the same way. His Dr. Peppers, his phones, everything the way he had it. It's still the same way. I still have his dirty clothes in the hamper. Everything is still the same. I wouldn't. So I feel it a lot, and I think that Johnny was he was a force of nature when he was here, and I can only imagine the stuff that he's doing now that he's not here. And I believe that he's our angel, for the kids and for me. And I just think that there's never going to be another character like him. I just think that Johnny was definitely an original, and he was so genuine that it's hard. It's just hard to lose somebody of that magnitude.
And you knowing him so well, since he got upstairs, what do you think was the first thing he did?
I think he's probably mimicked what he did down here. I think he's just so full of life, and he's had so many people, we both have, that have passed on that he was close to. Cause I bet you he was happy he reunited with his mom, his grandpa, my brother, my mom, my sister, his nephews, his cousins, there's so many people that we had lost before Johnny passed. I'm sure he's just up there living it up, but I don't think that he's always been a protector here, while he was here on this earth, and I think that he's still doing that up there. That's what I believe in my heart.
And also probably doing backflips as well. And this
yeah.
and this film Tapia has got some great reviews everywhere it has been released, and it has a lot of people talking about it. The viewers really seem to like it. What did Johnny think of working on this film? Of course, he was still alive when it was going on. What did he say about this film?
Well, the funny thing is when he was working on it, it wasn't supposed to be a film. It was research, because they were going to do a feature film on his life. And so the last year, they turned it into a documentary after Johnny's passing, but we weren't doing that. I mean, it was all just footage for research for a feature film. So I don't know. He didn't know it was going to become a documentary.
Oh, wow. And what was it like to team up with 50 Cent and Lou DiBella for this film?
It was, again, it's just like unreal, because 50 Cent, he said that he felt compelled to take on the project, because he said that when it was sent to him, he said it just brought back memories, because 50 Cent also had a mom who was murdered when he was 8, and it was never solved, and it made him the person that he is, which is a powerhouse. And he said he just connected with Johnny on so many levels that this was the film he wanted. And he said it was funny because when him and Lou originally started talking about doing some films, they had both agreed, we're not going to do any boxing. We don't want any boxing. And that was the first film that was sent to them, and they said they jumped all over it, because Johnny was more than a boxing story, and they said that it's a human interest story, and it's just a powerful, emotional story that keeps you at the edge of your seats from the beginning to end, and it's heart-wrenching, but there's a lot of happy moments in it too. So it was just like I said, it was kind of neat to have somebody of his magnitude recognize Johnny and have some kind of ties with him emotionally because of the things that they both went through.
And where will this film screen next?
I believe it's still bouncing all over the place from what I understand. I know it was in Minneapolis, I think a couple of weeks ago. I know they're going to be going to Texas. They're having a film festival there in March. And I know that it's just been shown all over. And once the film festivals are done, then it goes to distribution. And when it gets to distribution, it just depends. It could be on TV like HBO or Showtime, one of those, or it could go to the movie theaters. It's from my understanding, from dealing with the people that are involved. But they're not going to do the distribution until the film festivals are done.
Now, there's some kind of follow-up movie also coming up that's in the works, I hear, that 50 Cent will also be working on. What will that be about?
Well, actually, there's 2 feature films that are coming out. The documentary is called Tapia, and then the feature film that's going to be made on Johnny, which they're just waiting for the weather out here to clear. They already have the funding, and Shiloh Fernandez is the person who's playing Johnny. That's going to start filming here as soon as the snow melts, I believe around March. And that's with Eddie Alcazar. He's the one that directed the documentary. Now, there's the other feature film, and that feature film is called Johnny. And so the other one that 50 Cent's working on, it's a film on my life, like through my eyes of living with Johnny.
Wow, so that one's going to be more like a love, romance type thing.
Yes, yes, something like that, yes.
And I heard that there was some kind of foundation that has been started under Johnny's name also.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's called the Johnny Tapia Foundation, and what that was something Johnny was actually working on before he passed, because Johnny's passion has always been the youth and the elderly and, of course, abused women because his mom was murdered. But he didn't want his foundation to be limited to helping anyone. He wanted it to be able to help everyone. And so that was kind of how he wanted it done. And so we're just going to do that. We're working on some stuff right now. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have a food drive at the gym, and and we're just not going to stop. We're not going to just do it seasonal. We're going to do what Johnny wanted. So every few months, we're going to just have some kind of a charitable event and get back to the youth, whether it's buying them computers or in school, or if it's clothing them or helping them with school supplies, or maybe it's having helping somebody in an abused relationship get out of it, being able to start over. Whatever it may be, we're going to continue on with Johnny's dream.
And somebody asked me to ask, where can they get some official Johnny Tapia gear, like shirts or whatnot? When and where will that be available?
What's funny is we're working on his store. It's called Tapias Fight Shop, and we're all set to open. I believe we're 10 days out, and it's next to his boxing academy. And we have authentic Johnny Tapia wear back from, I'm talking the early 90s, even some of the 80s, all the way up to the new stuff that we were working on before his passing.
Wow, and will you be able to purchase, or will people be able to purchase something like that online and get it shipped to them?
Definitely. We have a store, and then we're going to have a website. They'll be able to have things shipped to them. And, I mean, it's just going to be an awesome store. There's going to be posters and hats and shirts and, boxing gear, everything with Johnny's stamp on it, because that was what he envisioned before his passing. And like I said, I was a zombie for a good year where I could not bring his dreams to life because I was so stuck on, losing him. But now I'm kind of like, okay, now I got to move on to the point of I need to get stuff done that he wanted and make him proud. So, yes, it will be available.
And it's only fitting because Johnny has inspired many fighters of the past, present, and even current fighters. And fighters like one of our friends at theboxingbar.com, Hector El Huracan Munoz, who fought under Johnny. What do you think of Johnny being such an inspiration to these kids or kids of the future or even kids of the past? What do you think of the inspiration he has left?
I think that his legacy is going to continue on, and I think, because Johnny's message to people when he was here, and I don't know if you remember him saying it, but he would always say, no matter how many times you fall, you can still pick yourself up and become successful. He really believed in never give up. You just don't give up. It didn't matter what the circumstances were. It didn't matter what you were going through, whether it was boxing or life. He told everybody the same thing. No matter how bad things get, it only can get better. And so don't give up. And I think that's kind of what he left behind with his fighters like Hector and Josh and the gym of kids we have. They all fight, and they all echo that same thing. Is Johnny always said, never give up, never give up. So even if they lose a fight, they come back and they win 2 or 3, and maybe they come back and maybe they lose the 4th one, but they never give up because that's what Johnny instilled in them. So I think that he had such an inspiring message for people because he never gave up. I mean, yes, he battled with drugs and depression, but he always seemed to pull himself out of it and rise to a higher level. And, that's what he wanted to leave that with people.
Overall, how do you want Johnny Tapia to be remembered? How does TERESA Tapia want Johnny Tapia to be remembered?
I want him to be remembered for the person that he was in and out of the ring. He was always genuine. He was always an entertainer. He loved people with all of his heart. I mean, that's what I tell people is, in the end, his heart was so worn out because he had so much love for the people and the world. And in the end, I think it was so worn out that it finally went out, and I want people to remember him that way, that his heart was just so big and worked so hard that in the end it stopped.
And I'm sure it's a very hard time for you this time of year without Johnny. But TERESA, without you being a boxer yourself, you have to be one of the strongest women I have ever, known in the sport somehow. And, every time I think of you, I think of that. and you are a true inspiration yourself for women and for wives that truly know how to stick by their men and go through thick and thin with them to the fullest, no matter what. And I thank you very much for coming on to theboxingbar.com finally and letting us know, all this background about you, Johnny, and your relationship with Johnny, and all these things coming in time in the future. And I thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the kind words, and just whenever you need to reach out, I'm here. And thanks for keeping his memory alive. I do appreciate that.
Thank you, and God bless you.